side to side, high and low, low and high, trying to find something that makes me feel alive. Nothing new under the sun, running to or running from. I just need someone to help me see the light. But I could never have been ready for this. I think I should start by letting you in. Take a look at you and start to lose my balance. What am I falling into? This feels like something new. I've seen a lot of views, but they were nothing like this. The way you do what you do, I think you're something brand new. Everybody spends their life trying to keep on getting by, searching but don't know just what we hope to find. I've been over 7 seas, hoping I can find some peace. Tell me, where's this love I hear is so divine? Well, I could never have been ready for this. I think I should start by letting you in. Take a look at you and start to lose my balance. What am I falling into? This feels like something new. I've seen a lot of views, but they were nothing like this. The way you do what you do, I think you're something brand new. What am I falling into? This feels like something new. The way you do what you do. I take a look at you and start to lose my balance. What am I falling into? This feels like something new.
Captain Paul Watson was a co-founder of the Greenpeace Foundation in 1972 and the founder of Sea Shepherd in 1977. In 2022, he was forced out of Sea Shepherd in a hostile takeover. So, he established the Captain Paul Watson Foundation to carry on the work they've been doing for half a century with the specific strategy of aggressive nonviolence, which means aggressive intervention without killing or injuring anyone. They took the name he created and the logos he designed, but they couldn't take away his life's mission. The foundation will carry on. This summer, with their new ship, the John Paul DeJoria, they intend to intervene against the Icelandic slaughter of endangered fin whales. And in 2024, they plan to be in the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary to stop the return of Japanese whalers who will be defying the International Court of Justice. They have 1 ship, but they need 2 more. Please visit paulwatsonfoundation.org to become a monthly donor. By becoming a monthly donor, you can help grow their Navy and help save our oceans. We don't survive on this planet with dead oceans. If the oceans die, we die. Please visit now www.paulwatsonfoundation.org. If you're not watching us live on YouTube, you're missing a lot. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and become a night dreamer. You are listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio Network, the home of Night Dreams Talk Radio, with Gary Anderson, syndicated worldwide. Paranormal Talk Radio, like you remember.
And I'm back, and I'll tell you, being off for a week, it was really hard. Of course, I wasn't feeling good, but still, I just had that. You know, like when you are skipping school, JC, that's how the feeling I had that whole week I was off.
You were being a naughty boy. That's why your guilty conscience got to you.
Yeah, but I played around in the studio quite a bit and changed things a little bit.
I know you did. It seems like you just was camped out in there, I swear.
I live here. My wife says, well, if it was a little bit bigger, we'd put your bed in here. And I wouldn't doubt it. She wouldn't do it, too. I'll tell you that. Well, you know what? In Russia, next to a nuclear power plant, they spotted a UFO.
Oh, hey, listen, that's not the first power plant that's spotted UFOs, that's for sure.
Again, you know, we've been getting NASA and others, SETI, has been getting signals from a planet out there. And it's like an Earth-size planet.
Yeah, this has been going on for a few days or a week or so now.
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. So I'm curious, as any other places, around the world has also got the same signal.
Well, I'm sure they are. Maybe they're trying to communicate with us.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. If they're light years away, they may already be dead by now. Who knows?
They would be.
Yeah.
Or we wouldn't even be born. Do you realize you wouldn't even been here? So if we wouldn't been here, why are we talking? Now, anyway, again, running across a field in Australia, a Bigfoot.
Oh,
and it got caught on camera this time by a drone camera.
Oh, I think they call them yowies down there, but yeah, listen, they've got a lore like we do here about those things. So that's interesting. I'll have to check that out.
Well, in Egypt, while they were going through one of the pyramids, they found 12 severed hands.
Oh boy. Now, didn't they used to cut thieves' hands off then?
Yeah, well, they used to cut a lot of things off too. I'll tell you that one.
Oh, tell me more.
I'm not going to tell you. This is a G-rated show. Humans will be able to live on after death by creating a twin by DNA by 2050.
Oh, that sounds like a whole cloning business going on there. Well, boy, what a can of worms are opening up now.
Yeah, could you imagine another JC and another Gary running around?
No, imagine the mischief that would cause, and it all come back on us. Like, what? I wasn't me.
How come you don't think about death till you get around 60? There's actually, I'll take that back. When you're a young kid, you realize death, but it's not that important. But when you get over 60, you start kind of thinking like, well, what am I going to do tomorrow if I'm here?
Well, it gives you more appreciation for life, I'm sure. Definitely.
Could you imagine you jump out of a plane at 14,000 feet and you didn't have a parachute that opened?
Oh, hey, that's happened to a few people, believe it or not.
Quite a few, but this woman actually survived. She fell 14,000 feet, broke virtually every bone in her body, and she said it was the most painful experience she ever had, but she survived.
That's amazing. Now, there was a couple other people through history that survived too, but, you're looking at, 120 miles per second? That's just, what an impact. Ouch.
Yeah, well, I wonder what the speed at 14,000 feet would be by the time you hit. It ain't the hit, it's the stop that does it.
What about, you would think some people would have a heart attack just going down, realizing, at about, 8,000, oh, my chute is not coming open. Oh.
Well, you can only flap your arms so long. But, that's another thing. How come you can sit there on a 10-story building, drop a watermelon, and it's all over the place. Somebody drops 14,000 feet and breaks virtually every bone in their body, but survives and is able to walk yet. And that is really interesting. Maybe it's the angle she fell, the way she hit, maybe the ground condition where she hit, but that is really unique. Well, a time traveler, another one, and so far they're like remote viewers. They haven't been very accurate. This one claims that this time traveler claims that aliens are going to abduct 8,000 of the best engineers and scientists in one day.
Like they have a need for our engineers and scientists. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Well, yeah, but think about that. 8,000.
So they're on a recruiting tour right now to get the best ones.
Yeah, they're going to take the best ones. McDonald's. You know, a lot of people don't realize, I think we're going to go into a real deep recession. And I've talked about it on the show quite a bit, but McDonald's this week shut down all their corporate, all their district offices worldwide. And they kind of did like what this other guy did. It bought Twitter. He, told the ones that stay home, they got an email. And the email says, well, we don't need you anymore. You lost your job. And a lot of these employees, have been with McDonald's for a long time. They're not very happy. They figured they at least would get their manager talking to them and saying, hey, we got to let you go. But, they get an email instead and say, hey, you're fired.
Yeah, I guess it's a sign of times. That's as bad as breaking up with somebody with a Post-it. I mean, talk about not impersonal. I mean, come on. That should be, you should have to fire somebody face to face, I would think.
Yeah, well, they're saying, McDonald's is saying that, they had the best year was last year. They made billions of dollars profit. It's the biggest year they ever had for profits. But they see the future about the second quarter of this year. They're worried we're going to go into a deep recession. So they're going to.
Sounds like Sounds like they're creating the future by doing such.
But yeah, well, it is the same thing. When I went through a recession back in the 80s, it was the same thing. The news people were talking about what's going to happen, right? And the government came out and said, hey, we're going to go into a recession. Well, they made a mistake. And actually, we weren't going to go into a recession. You can research this. But they announced that we were going to go into a recession, that the economy is slowing when it actually wasn't as bad off as it was. That caused mass layoffs. People were panicking. They quit buying stuff. And guess what happened? We went into a recession.
Right. And the power of suggestion. Maybe there's powers that be that want us to do that. I don't know. But I think you create a lot of people, as a mass could create this. So you got to be careful.
Well, we got some people on chat. Well, Mother Scorpion out of Canada is with us. Kim is supposed to be in bed sick. Well, I bet she just couldn't miss my voice. She's on here. We got Barb, and we got some new people on there. So I just want to say hi to all you night dreamers. Make sure you tell your friends about our show. And, it's really, Jaci, really strange. Like I was telling you, we almost had 10 million downloads the other night when I wasn't even on the air. People just went to the website and downloaded. It was crazy.
I tell you, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of action on the website, too.
Well, why aren't they going on YouTube? That's why I got that new recording, telling people, tell your friends about it and subscribe to the channel.
Yeah, they can come on. They can watch you. They can ask questions in real time.
Wait a minute. You don't know this might be an imposter here.
It might be.
I could be like Putin. I could have 5 to 6 people looking like me.
It's your avatar, your clone that we were speaking of earlier.
Okay, well, we're going to be right back. We got a great guest tonight. We're going to talk about Mothman. And, well, is it real? Is it folklore? So we'll find out more. So stay tuned. You're listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio.
The Disclosure 2.0 Conference in Washington, D.C. with the National Press Club event is June 10th through June 12th. Dr. Greer will share explosive witness testimony and analysis with a call for the government to open up all files on the UFO issue and get to the bottom of the secrecy. For more information on the Disclosure 2.0 conference, go to this website, www.seriousdisclosure.com.
Hi, this is Val Von Torn of Metatron Power and Light. You're listening to Gary Anderson and Night Dreams Talk Radio.
Well, JC, what can you tell the listeners about our guest tonight?
Well, our guest tonight is Bill Kousoulas, and he has been interested in the paranormal since the 1970s. And, well, since 2003, he has been a dedicated researcher in the Mothman phenomena, from reports to lore to you name it. Now, he has also written a book from, well, all his research on the Mothman.
Well, great. Well, Bill, I'm glad to have you on the show. How are you doing tonight?
Gary, I'm good. More importantly, how are you?
Anytime I can find my car keys, I'm doing good.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Glad you could find your car keys. It's important to be able to drive.
Oh, yeah. I do want to say to all my friends, I've been getting a lot of emails. They suspected I had throat cancer. What it turned out is I'm very close to having that. They said it could turn into a cancer, but there's literally hundreds of lesions in my throat. And, I first thought it was because I would go like once a year and smoke maybe about 30 cigars. And then I wouldn't smoke again for the rest of the year. I've been doing that for 30, 40 years. And the doctor said, no, it's not that. It's because you have bad acid reflux and you haven't taken care of it and it's destroyed your throat. So, and what I'm telling people is if you have something going wrong, don't wait like I did. I waited months before I finally got the nerve to go in and get checked out. So anyway, so you got involved in Mothman. Now, were you interested in Mothman or cryptids at all before that?
What happened with me, Gary, was that back in 2003, that's the first time that I saw the Mothman Prophecies movie. And I was really captured by it. A very interesting movie. At the end of it, in the credits, they talked about how it was based upon real events that happened in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1966. In 1967, and I've always been interested in things that they have their basis in something that really happened. So I started studying. I read John Keel's book, The Mothman Prophecies. I read that. I got my hands on everything else that I could about the whole Mothman phenomenon, and really over the course of the next 10, 15 years, really studied it as much as I possibly could, found it to be a fascinating, fascinating story.
Interesting. Now, we were younger. Were you interested in anything like Bigfoot or other things, or just watching that movie got you interested in Mothman?
Well, interestingly enough, Gary, back in probably 1976, I started watching a television series called Project UFO. Did you ever see that show? Did you ever watch that on Sunday night television?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's the first I ever became introduced to anything about aliens or extraterrestrials or UFOs or what have you. Before that, when I was just a little kid, my mom used to read The Hobbit to me. So I was exposed to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings early on in life, probably 6, 7 years old. And then when I was 9, then I started watching Project UFO. So, really from that point forward, I was really interested in anything that was paranormal in nature.
Well, I've been into it almost 50 years. I've been in talk radio that long, and I've been covering the strange, the paranormal UFOs and abductions and, Bigfoot and Mothman and stuff like that. But, I did a lot of research before coming, having you on here tonight. And, again, there's places like in Arizona in the deserts where there was reported by the Indians going back 100 years ago of flying, devil-looking creatures.
And there have been other instances of similar beings to what was described in Point Pleasant that's come to be known as Mothman, figures that showed up in cave paintings that were, basically painted eons and eons ago. There was a spring-heeled jack phenomenon that took place in England back in, I want to say, the 1840s or 1850s, which has a striking resemblance to what we've come to know as Mothman. There was the Mattoon, Illinois Mad Gasser, which is kind of an interesting thing to call anything. But that was something that was similar to what we've come to know as Mothman too. So there have been, interesting other reports through history prior to what happened in Point Pleasant. Point Pleasant just seems to be the microcosm, or at least what we've come to know Mothman as being his famous haunt there in West Virginia in the late 60s. But there have also been sightings that have taken place since then. So definitely there's something out there that bears this resemblance to this creature.
Can you tell the listeners what happened back, in Point Pleasant?
So the very first sighting that's associated with Mothman from West Virginia, that was reported by John Keel, who was a New York City writer, investigator of UFOs and things of that nature. The very first sighting actually happened in Clendenin, West Virginia. And that is an area that's kind of in the Charleston, West Virginia area, about 65 miles away from Point Pleasant. There were 3 grave diggers who were in a cemetery digging a funeral plot. And in the process of doing this, they happened to look up. And at the tree line level, they noticed that there was this brown flying humanoid that scared them half to death. And that was the first report of Mothman in West Virginia in 66. And I want to say this was in November, like around November the 11th. Within a few days, the very first sighting of Mothman in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, which is right on the Ohio River, that took place on November 15th. There were 2 married couples who were out for a drive, and they were in the TNT area, which was a former munitions factory type area that's about 11 miles north of Point Pleasant. Kind of a lover's lane type place. It's deserted now. It's just kind of overgrown with forest and that type of thing. But this lover's lane type place, these kids were out in Roger Scarberry's 1957 Chevy, just hanging out, driving around, and they noticed this black winged being with red piercing eyes, scared them again half to death. They got in their car and they drove all the way back to Point Pleasant at 70, 80, 90 miles an hour, right along the highway, heading back to Point Pleasant. Now, my wife and I have been to Point Pleasant dozens of times, and that highway that they were talking about goes right along the Ohio River, and it's scary to drive along at night at 40 miles an hour, let alone 80. They showed up at the police station, and when they arrived at the police station, they gave statements to a deputy by the name of Millard Halstead, and he was a guy who had known these kids since they were very, very young, and he said that they were not the kind of kids that would make things up. And so he really believed that they saw something. They didn't know what it was, but they had seen something. And all types of sightings took place for the next 13 months in Point Pleasant, not only of Mothman, but also of UFOs. Men in Black showed up. There were cattle mutilations. It was just really a plethora of paranormal experience. I like to tell people that Point Pleasant in 66 and 67, very similar to what we hear of Skinwalker Ranch in Utah now, where all kinds of different paranormal activity that you wouldn't normally associate with each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but different about Point Pleasant. It came really fast, and then it kind of like simmered and then died. But, again, was it UFO related? Was it something, mind control? I don't know. But, again, I've interviewed people that claim like the Men in Black would like pull up to people's houses, and they were dressed, like back in the late 50s, mid 50s, the sunglasses, the hat, that look. And they would drive up in a new old looking car, which makes me wonder, our signals take a long time to reach out there. So maybe these ETs, I figured that's how we dress. That's the type of vehicles we have. So they replicated that type of stuff. And,
I agree, Gary. And one of the things that John Keel talked about in the Mothman Prophecies book was that exactly as you just described it, these Men in Black would show up in these late model cars, but they'd look like they were driven right off the showroom floor, but they'd be 10 or 12 years old. And they'd show up in fedoras, and they'd show up in neatly pressed clothes. Their shoes looked like they were spit shined and never had been worn before, absolutely flawless. And something that was even crazier than that was that sometimes they would show up wearing clothing that hadn't gone out of style already. It had never been in style. It would come into style later on. So is time, totally distorted here? It's really, it's an interesting study.
It really is when you really think about it. And again, if you could imagine, here it is, mid 60s. And people are coming to your door dressed like the mid 50s. So, I mean, that would be kind of eerie and ask really weird questions.
Yes, and sometimes the way they talked was in a real sing-song type of a voice, almost as though they were searching for words and didn't really quite know how to communicate the way that we would. It was as though they were robots and just mimicking what they thought they should be saying. And sometimes the things they said didn't make sense.
Now, also in the area, wasn't there stuff from World War II where they were making like dynamite bunkers?
Yes, absolutely, Gary. That's the TNT area that I was talking about a moment ago. It's 11 miles north of Point Pleasant, and the area today is known as the McClintock Wildlife Preserve. But in this TNT area, which was called the TNT area because dynamite TNT was manufactured for the World War II effort in this area, there are about 100 concrete igloos that used to store the TNT. And the idea was that if enemy aircraft somehow were able to fly above this area, that the overgrowth with the trees and the forest area and all that would conceal these igloos that were concealing the TNT. But that is the area back there. There's all kinds of toxic waste from all these chemicals over the years that seeped its way into the ground, which then seeped its way into retention ponds and artificially made lakes that are back there too. And even today, I mean, it was considered a Superfund cleanup area, I think in the 1970s and 1980s, but there's still high levels of contaminants that are in that area. And it's a really spooky place. I've been out there at night many, many times, and it's pretty creepy.
It would be. I'm just wondering too, because of, of the dynamite being, explosives being made during World War II, maybe that was one of their areas they wanted to investigate.
And quite possibly, and we talked about Men in Black, and the TNT area during the Mothman flap in 66 and 67 was shut down. And basically the military came in and said, you can't go in here. And Men in Black were around and keeping people away. And there definitely was something odd going on back there in that area.
Yeah. I mean, when you went there with your wife, what type of feeling did you have?
So interestingly enough, our first trip out there was in 2016, and it was just a vacation. It was a week-long road trip. And we went out there, and by 2016, I'd been studying Mothman and reading everything I could about the phenomenon for 12, 13 years. So you can imagine it was almost like a fairy tale. And we drove into town, we went over the Silver Memorial Bridge, and it was a perfectly clear day in July, bright and sunny. Just the place seemed surreal to me. What I've found over the years, because we've been there every year since then, so for the last 7 years we've been going there, what I've sensed is there's an energy that's there, but it doesn't feel dark. It doesn't feel like there's something malignant, that's going to fly out of the bushes. It's a real positive energy. There's a really nice vibe in town, and the entire area it feels very wholesome. It's not at all what you'd expect from something that's associated with something as creepy as Mothman is.
Now, did you have a chance of all your visits there to talk people that maybe saw the Mothman or had friends, relatives that, encountered it?
So we've gotten to know some people out there really pretty well. And one of them is Jeff Wamsley. And Jeff Wamsley is the curator and the owner of the world's only Mothman Museum right there in Point Pleasant. And he had shared with us that there are people that he's interviewed over the years that had sightings, people that he's talked to that have had reports of having seen things. Now, the very first trip that we took, we met a lady by the name of Carolin Harris, and Carolin ran the Harris's Steakhouse, which was right across the street from where the Mothman Museum is. Carolin and Jeff Wamsley founded the Mothman Festival, and she's the first person we met when we came to town. She told us that she never did see Mothman, and she never did see a UFO, but she said that a UFO landed in her brother's backyard. So she became a believer at that point. Again, she never saw Mothman, but she did see the Men in Black. And she explained the Men in Black to us. And she said there were two types of Men in Black. One type of Men in Black was very much like what you would call the guys with the fedora hats that you just basically think are government agents or some secrets, Majestic 12 type people that aren't really from the government, maybe higher than the government or the shadow government or whatever you want to call it. But then there were the other ones. And these ones she described as people that just weren't from around here. And it was obvious that they weren't from around here because they didn't look like they were your red-blooded, blonde-headed Americans. They looked like they were from either the Far East or maybe even from a different area. She didn't go on to say this, Gary, but she indicated that perhaps they were not human beings.
That is interesting. Now, I mean, the connection of the bridge that went down and the Mothman, what can you, I mean, have they ever figured out what caused the bridge to fail?
There is a mechanical explanation for what happened to the Silver Bridge. So for folks who aren't familiar with the Silver Bridge disaster, to me, the Silver Bridge disaster is the real reason that we talk about Mothman like we do and why it became as legendary as it has. It was a horrible, horrible thing that happened in this tiny little community of 4,000 or 5,000 people in Point Pleasant. And on December 15th of 1967, the 39-year-old Silver Bridge collapsed under the weight of a fully loaded bridge deck. Both sides of the bridge, the stoplights were red, so it completely packed up. And this is a bridge, mind you, that was built with Model T Fords in mind. It was built with even a horse and buggy transit that was going across the bridge back in the 20s. And now we have 18-wheelers in the 60s, and we have heavier cars and all this type of stuff. And as this bridge was loaded up on a very, very cold evening in winter during the Christmas season, it was a bridge that was built under what they called the I-bar construction method. So it's not really a suspension bridge per se, like the Golden Gate Bridge or something of that nature. It is a more tightly wound and more cheaply constructed bridge built by I-bars, which are, to describe them, it's almost like a socket type of construction. And one of these I-bars had a small manufacturing defect in it. And at 5:04 p.m. on December the 15th, that I-bar cracked. And what happened was it collapsed. The I-bar collapsed. The bridge turned to the left, and it dumped half of its cars into the river that way. Then it tilted to the right, and the rest of the cars fell after that. And then the entire bridge construction fell on top of those poor people as they fell into the river. So it was an I-bar manufacturing defect that caused the collapse of the Silver Bridge.
Well, back that time, they didn't have the capabilities to megaflex metal, iron and steel. So, I mean, there could be a lot of, defects in it. But, what I also read on that, when that one failed, it caused some other ones to fail, and that's what caused it. So, I mean, that would be a horrible way to go, and again, being plunged into the river and then have the bridge come down on top of you.
Yes, Gary, it was a terrible tragedy. I mean, it really, really was. Only a handful of people were able to be saved from that. Ultimately, 46 people lost their lives, and it just impacted the community. Even today, people still talk about it. And one of the things Jeff Wamsley shared with us when we interviewed him for our book was that the good thing about the visitors who come to town, they always, when they speak of the Silver Bridge disaster, it's always done respectfully, with an air of concern for the people in the community. So it's been handled very well by the community and by the people who come to town to check out Mothman. They always want to know about the bridge, and they treat it very respectfully.
Now, depending on who you talk to on Mothman, there's a lot of different theories out there. Do you think the Mothman was there to kind of like afterwards, or were they there to try to stop it, or what's your feeling about it? Because all of a sudden the Mothman appears.
Well, so we talk about the title of the movie, which is also the title of the book by John Keel, being the Mothman Prophecies. And one of the things that's not really stated a lot when it comes to conversations about Mothman is, why do they talk about the Mothman Prophecies? Why prophecies? Well, the reason that the term prophecies is given in the titles is because John Keel was receiving prophecies of different things that were going to happen, not just in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1967, but also all over the world. In fact, he received a prophecy that Martin Luther King was going to be assassinated. And of course, we know that that happened. He received a prophecy that Bobby Kennedy was going to be assassinated. And we know that that happened as well. The sitting Pope at the time, he received a prophecy that he was going to be killed. Well, there was an attempt to kill the Pope in 68, I think it was. That didn't happen. But the way that we kind of correlate the Mothman Prophecies part of this is that he was also receiving messages that there was going to be some type of disaster on the Ohio River. And he thought all along it was going to be one of the chemical plants that line the banks of the Ohio River all through West Virginia. And so he thought that one of the chemical plants was going to explode, or there was going to be some type of a chemical leakage that was going to cause people death or what have you. And Mary Heyer, who was the local stringer for the Athens, Ohio Messenger in Point Pleasant, she was a newspaper reporter who John Keel did investigations and basically had conversations with witnesses of Mothman during this time, as well as witnesses of UFOs. She had a dream that she saw Christmas presents floating on the river. And later on, as we know, unfortunately, when the bridge collapsed, it was during the Christmas season. And there were Christmas presents that fell out of these people's vehicles, and they floated in the Ohio River.
It is absolutely horrible. Bill, we need to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Bill talking about, Mothman. And, there's stories about, a dog. It was literally supposed to have been tore up by a Mothman in a barn and all that stuff. So we'll cover all that. So stay tuned. You're listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio.
At AaronJudkins.com, there's a question. Who are the guardians of Göbekli? Göbekli Tepe, one of the most puzzling archaeological sites of the Stone Age. It is considered the oldest pre-pottery Neolithic site ever discovered. This mysterious site is changing our perception of the Neolithic, a time period just after the Younger Dryas event. Is there a connection to the heavens and the gods? Do its symbols represent the earliest known language? It's the paradigm that's changing the paradigm. Who are these guardians of Göbekli? Get the new book and find out. Guardians of Göbekli at www.AaronJudkins.com. You are tuned into Gary Anderson on Night Dreams Talk Radio. Now, get ready for that real ride in UFOs and the strange. And now, here's Gary coming to you live from his studio in beautiful Gig Harbor, Washington.
And we are back, just waiting for that thunder to disappear here, which is quite common here in the Northwest. Bill, there's been reports of a dog that, was taken from a Mothman, and then they supposedly found the dog's body a few miles away, tore up and stuff. Did you ever check into that?
So, Gary, I think what you're talking about there was that there was an individual by the name of Merle Partridge. Merle Partridge was in West Virginia also, not quite in Point Pleasant, but within the same vicinity, within 100 miles of where the Mothman phenomenon was really taking place. But shortly before he was sighted in Point Pleasant, I want to say it was November the 12th, Mr. Partridge was at home watching television. And as he was watching television, he noticed that his TV started making a strange sound. And the way he described it was making a noise like it was winding up like a generator. And as this was happening, the pitch kept going higher and higher until finally the tube blew out of his television set. Now, while this was happening, he happened to look outside and he saw what he described as a couple of red lights going around in circles, and just going around in circles and circles and circles. And his dog Bandit, a German Shepherd, took off out of the house and ran after these lights. And as I recall, Bandit was never seen again. And the way Mr. Partridge described this and talked about his dog was that this dog never would have just taken off and run away from home. Something must have happened. Now, I do believe that there was a report of a dog that was found dead by the side of the road within the area later on, and then that dog disappeared and nobody ever saw it again. So I think that's what we're talking about, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, there's also, rumors out there that he found, well, somebody thought they found a Mothman in their, barn.
There was a story that I recall. I want to say there was a farmer who had cornered a large winged being in his barn and shot that. And I think it was in Gallipolis Ferry, which is right across the Ohio River from Gallipolis, Ohio, but on the West Virginia side. And in this barn, he found a large barred owl. And when he showed it to different people who had seen this alleged Mothman, they said that it wasn't really like what they had seen. So it was similar, just that it had the wings and it was a big owl. But the people who had been witnessing Mothman didn't think that that's what they had seen.
Interesting. You know, what's really interesting is reports all across, Philadelphia, as far as Texas, Washington State, all over the place of Mothmen in the last 10 years.
You do hear different reports of Mothman in different places. And our friend Andy Colvin, the author and publisher, has a book called Mothman Speaks. He has a number of different Mothman titled books, but he had a web board that he calls Mothy Talk. And in that, a number of different people had posted stories about their sightings of these strange creatures. And all the way over in Fukushima, Japan, there were sightings back when they had the big hurricane back. And I want to say that was maybe 2008, 2009, thereabouts, in that timeline. So really all over the world, Gary, they're reported all over the world.
Which I find interesting, and I keep going back to what the American natives talked about, these flying humanoids. And I'm just wondering, could that be what the Mothman is?
Possibly. And again, John Keel, I know I talk about him a lot, but John Keel's working theory of what Mothman could be is the Thunderbird. In the Native American tradition, the creature that really sits at the top of their totem pole and is between basically the humans and all the lower animals that are on the totem pole below us, but in between the humans and the gods is the way that they describe that. Now, there is also an Eastern interpretation of the Thunderbird, which is known as the Garuda. And the Garuda kind of follows the Buddhist tradition and is said to really kind of stabilize your development to spiritual progress. So the idea that it could be a Thunderbird or a Garuda or some type of benevolent deity is one that certainly Keel talked about that I find very interesting.
Well, I do too. And the thing is, again, all these reports, like before we went on the air, the late Joe Taylor, which passed away here just recently, had actually a friend that actually saw, now Jaci, am I right, saw a Mothman twice. The first time she, saw it and she thought it was a guy in the middle of the road in the middle of the night. So she stopped and yelled at him and then, realized, hey, this isn't a human, because it kind of like the wings all of a sudden appear and it like flew away. And then supposedly, was it a couple of weeks later, she was going to work again late in the morning and she actually hit one and it bounced off the side of the road. And Jaci, wasn't that kind of like scary situation that she was in?
Yeah, you're exactly right. She did have 2 encounters within a couple weeks. Now that was amazing as it was, but she did hit it, and of course she didn't think about getting the DNA off there, but that really spooked her. I think she did make a report about it, but the funny thing was that was in Texas. Now there was 2 brothers that also had an encounter with pretty much a Mothman creature also. Now this was a few years before that, but yeah, this was a lonely, back road. I think she was going home from work or something, but yeah, and it was the same vicinity or same road. 2 weeks later, when she had the same encounter.
Yeah, and then when she hit it, she panicked. She thought she killed somebody, and
Yeah.
she got out of the car, and then the thing got up and just stared at her with the glowing, eyes, and just for a couple minutes did a stare down, and then it just flew away. But the thing is, it did do damage to the front of her car, and like I was telling Joe Taylor, she should have went to the sheriff's office, explained everything. And maybe they could have got DNA off of it because supposedly the fender and the bumper got damaged from hitting it.
Yep.
That would have been some good evidence right there, Bill.
It'd be really nice, Gary, wouldn't it, to have some type of definitive blood evidence or, like you say, DNA evidence? It'd be great to do that with Mothman, Bigfoot, some of these paranormal things that we have such a hard time identifying. It'd be wonderful to have some working tangible evidence.
Could you imagine, though, the fear you would have? You thought you hit somebody, and you get out, and then all of a sudden you see, them get up, and they kind of look like a human from a distance, till they open up their wings. I mean, I would tell you what, I'd have to have depends on at that point.
I would be mortified. I'm right there with you. I would be really scared.
And like I was telling you, I've had truckers, like a trucker called in and told me, God, a year ago that he was up at a truck stop in Eugene, Oregon. He had a brand new rig he bought, and he wanted to park it off to the side because he didn't want any damage to it. And he went in, ate, came back, he got into his truck, started it, turned his headlights on, and here was this creature, with its wings half folded out, but not out all the way, glaring with red eyes, he claimed, just staring him down. And then after a couple minutes, it just kind of like opened up his wings and slowly drifted away.
I just can't even imagine. I mean, I can't even imagine what that's got to be like. I'm a paranormal enthusiast and I love studying it, but I don't think I really want those direct encounters. That's not something I really want to be involved with myself.
Well,
not directly.
I don't either. And then you wonder about cattle mutilation. We sit there and think maybe cattle mutilation, some of it was done by the military, some of it was done by ETs. Well, maybe some of this mutilation is done with Mothman because, they have to have it that size. They're over 6 feet tall. They're big. They have to have some type of appetite. They're not going to McDonald's and, getting a Big Mac.
One would think not. No, you wouldn't think so. I think you have to, I don't know. I guess the way that I look at it, Gary, is that I've never seen Mothman so much as a cryptid, so much as I think it's more of an interdimensional type being, almost like an energetic force or an angelic being, something that's not really physical per se, but really more spiritual or energetic or electrical or what have you. John Keel talked a lot about a concept that he defined the universe with. He described as the super spectrum. And we talk about the distortions of time and the different things that maybe these men in black tune into the wrong frequency or the wrong timeline, and they show up with, clothing from the past or, with styles that haven't even happened yet. And maybe this Mothman creature is something along the energetic spectrum that it's kind of like taking a radio dial and swinging that radio dial. And maybe you get a signal at one point, but just for a moment, because if you keep on throwing that radio dial to the right or to the left, then you're going to lose that frequency and all of a sudden that signal is going to be lost. That's the way that I've I don't want to say I understand Mothman to be. That's my theory. I mean, my thoughts are along the lines of what Keel says in terms of it maybe being more energetic or angelic and really not a creature that needs to eat.
Well, again, I'm going to, disagree kind of, because I've had mutual Kaku on the show. And, we're so close to cracking another dimension. And when he said, when we crack this next dimension, portals and parallel universes could exist. So maybe these things have the ability to, be interdimensional, where we don't see them all the time, but for some reason they come into our dimension where we do see them.
And I think, Gary, it's entirely possible that perhaps it's physical in that plane, and maybe it can come over here and manifest physically for a time and then go back again. I mean, this is just all hypothetical. We don't really know. That's what makes these conversations so fun.
Well, I just keep thinking about that poor lady that hit one and it did damage to her car. So that had to be physical to be able to do it, because she said if I remember right, Jaci, when she hit it, it got thrown out of like 100 and some feet down the road when she hit it. So whatever it was, there was an impact, wasn't there?
There was. Well, yeah, it left it down. I think it broke a little bit of her grill too. And the thing was, she actually thought it was a person. She didn't see the wings flare out. And then when she got out and had that face-to-face event, got a little closer, her whole life was turned around, believe me. And then to have another encounter 2 weeks later, oh my God.
Yeah, Joe Taylor, was really big. He was into dinosaurs going through and, bones and stuff from the past, prehistoric. But, he also was into Bigfoot and Mothman. And, again, here was it. What part of Texas was he in?
That was toward West Texas, out there where there's a lot of lonely stretches of road and country and desert out there.
Yeah, and he said there was getting to be a lot of reports of Mothman out in that area.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, Gary, we talked to a gentleman from New Jersey maybe 2 months ago. We had a conversation with him, and he had said that he had felt that he had a Mothman sighting. And what his sighting was kind of similar to what you were talking about with the individual who hit that being, and then it flew off several 30 feet or what have you away. He had said that he and his daughter, as they pulled up, there was something in the road, and they stopped and they took a look at it, and he described it as being kind of like a mini Mothman, almost like it was a small fairy or a sprite or something of that nature. And I found that very interesting too.
Well, on chat, Kim was saying maybe it's a condor bird, but I don't know any of those that are 6-7 feet tall and weigh about a couple 100 pounds.
That is another theory that I've heard, is that perhaps it's a condor also. I've heard that.
What's your feeling about that?
I still think it's something different. I still think it's something angelic or energetic, or something we don't really have the ability to define, or maybe, like we mentioned a little while ago, something that might slip through from a different dimension and maybe manifest physically for a time and then go back into that dimension.
Yeah. Or maybe they're from underground too. And because of all the things that's been going on worldwide, that has driven them from underground too.
Entirely possible. Entirely possible.
So how long did it take you to write this book, Bill?
So the book that Jackie and I wrote, we started researching it in February. We came up with a plan, and the whole idea was we wanted to be able to talk to people from Point Pleasant about their experiences of the Silver Bridge disaster, how it impacted their life, and also their experiences of the paranormal phenomena that happened in 66 and 67 and how that impacted their lives. And the book itself took from February of 2021 through, we published it in August of 2022. So what does that come out to? Just about a year and a half? I think about a year and a half.
Interesting. Are you planning to write a second book on Mothman?
We sure are. The book that we have now is called Bridging the Tragedy, Silver Linings in the Mysterious Ohio River Valley. Our next book, and I guess maybe I misheard your question there and I answered it too quickly. Our second book isn't necessarily going to be devoted to Mothman per se, but it's going to be along the lines of the witchcraft phenomenon that's happening in the United States now and how that's affecting the youth of today. And this is just a theory that we have at this point in time. We don't have a plan put together for it yet because we're still pretty busy promoting the current book. and working on an audio version of that that's going to be coming out this summer. But we hope to be able to start researching for our next project coming up here, I would say somewhere towards the end of the second quarter. So May, June, we'll be looking for participants probably for June and July to start conducting interviews over the summer.
You know, people don't realize about witchcraft. It's out there really a lot more than people even realize. And that's scary.
You know, and it is, Gary, I think, and that's the reason that Jaci and I are really passionate about wanting to get out there, because the focus of our first book, Bridging the Tragedy, is about a concept called post-traumatic growth. It's about the things that we go through in life that we think would just crush us. Like imagine a Silver Bridge disaster and you lost both your mom and your dad. That actually happened to one of the guys in our book. But then to take a look at his life and to see how this gentleman was able to kind of really grow into a politician and a businessman and really excel in life, not because he was able to get by what happened, but really because of what happened. He took meaning from it. And our next study, I think we really want to warn people about the dangers of what they can get themselves involved with some of these spiritual forces, which are much more powerful than we are. We can't even conceive of how powerful they are. And to just do, spells and come up with incantations and get into this, spirit world in a way that we have really no defense against or limited defense against is something that we want to explore and then kind of help people, because what I really don't want to see happen is have kids get exposed to these kinds of things. And it's happening. Like you mentioned, Gary, these books are in libraries, bookstores have entire rows on witchcraft now. It's just scary how available these things are.
Well, one of my late sons, too, he actually was taking a course on becoming a Morlock or whatever it is, online before he passed on. And that was getting scary. But, I was married to a dark witch, my first marriage. And I tell you, it scared me. The things that transpired, Bill, you never could realize what I went through. And at the start, I figured it was just a bunch of crap. But towards the end of the marriage, then that's what destroyed my marriage. I realized that some of the stuff that she was doing was real, and it's scary. And that is over 50 years ago. Can you imagine how much it is into society with young people? It's bad.
It's really frightening. And Gary, now that you're mentioning this, I remember our first conversation a couple of years ago. You did tell me that. I'd forgotten about it, but I totally remember the conversation now. And gosh, to have to live through something like that and then to have these things happen in your world, it's spooky stuff. And gosh, I just can't even imagine. It's not been something that's part of my life. I haven't experienced it. I've certainly not been involved with it, but we just see.
Okay. Okay.
Courses people can take in order to learn to do things that it's scary. Yeah.
Now, Jaci, do you have some wisdom that, before they start writing this book and investigating what they should do to protect themselves?
Yeah. My strongest advice, whatever your higher power is, you need to grip it, use it to the fullest before, during, and after any kind of research on anything that may reach out and touch you or follow you home or make somebody mad and use it against you.
Yeah, that's one thing I really recommend. Our time has gone by so fast. You remember the Jeepers Creepers 1, 2, and 3 movies?
I do. Yes, Gary, I do.
Does that kind of resemble the Mothman, do you think?
You know what's really bizarre about that? I had not seen all 3 of those movies, but I did see one of them a couple of years ago. And we noticed the very last scene, or one of the last scenes of the movie, you see this dark silhouetted thing going across the moonlit sky. And sure enough, it really did look like what I've come to think, and through the people I've talked to have described as being Mothman. Yes.
Very interesting. Now, our time is up. How can they find your book?
Well, Gary, thanks for asking. I appreciate that. So the name is Bill Kousoulas. It's Bill and Jaci Kousoulas. And the name of the book is Bridging the Tragedy, Silver Linings in the Mysterious Ohio River Valley. It is for sale on Amazon. It's really easy to find. just type in our last name. It's if you can spell the last name, it's a little tricky, but that there's not many other publications by anybody with the last name Kousoulas on Amazon. We also have a website. It's Phenomenology Research Professionals. You can find that on Facebook. And our email is prp1000@gmail.com. And feel free to contact us over Facebook or through email or what have you, and we'd love to talk to you.
Well, great, too. And when you come out with this new book, get a hold of us. I'd love to talk to you about it. Trust me.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. Gary, thanks for having me on the show. James, appreciate your time and help as always.
Okay, my friend, you have a great weekend, will you?
Thanks, Gary.
You
take care.
Well, Jaci, we got some great guests lined up next week. Who do we have?
Oh, we do got some great guests. I got to tell you what, we got Mike Bluer coming on. Now, he lives down in Mississippi. He had an extremely scary encounter with Bigfoot. He's going to tell us about that. And then on Thursday, we got the world-renowned Jim Vera coming on. Now, he's a master stonemason, but he's also a big-time researcher in ancient giants and a lot of other things. So he's going to be a great guest coming on Thursday. And then on Friday, we got Paul Blake Smith coming on. Now, he has researched and written a book about the Nixon, Jackie Gleason inspection of the aliens down at the Homestead Air Force Base.
That is going to be really interesting. Again, Jackie Gleason, his whole life, when he got involved with Nixon, changed where even his house was built like a style of a UFO. His whole life was consumed about UFOs. If you went into his house, you would see books about ETs and UFOs everywhere. And that's how it obsessed him after he saw these ET bodies that supposedly Nixon showed him. So that is going to be a great show. We're also doing a little bit something different because I get better, I'm going to be on Sundays, the first and the last Sunday of the month. And then for 2 Sundays, Jaci is going to be on talking about ghost hunting and stuff like that to, make sure, that we're all covered during the month. So I hope everybody's had a good, time listening tonight. I want to again thank Bill for coming on. Mothman, do you feel that he is, or they're real, or is it folklore? My feeling is it is something. Is it coming from another dimension? Is it flesh and blood? I really think it is, because even if it comes from another dimension, it is going to be flesh and blood. Otherwise, I'll tell you, that car, that lady hit a Mothman that wouldn't have had damage done to it. So that tells me it is flesh and blood. And then you look at some of the cattle mutilations that's gone on across the country. Maybe a percentage of that is from Mothman. And maybe Mothman feeds on humans too. I don't know. But you got to have your imagination going, and you have to have your eyes open. Anything you want to say here at the end of the show here?
Yeah, I hope everybody has a safe and happy Easter, and we will talk to you, everybody, I guess, on Wednesday.
Well, Jaci, say good night, America.
Well, good night, America, and to you too, Gary.
Okay, we will catch you on the other side of the campground next Wednesday. So stay tuned. It's going to be a great week next week.
Mark your calendar now for June 6th. On that day, The Lost Century and How to Reclaim It will be released. This is a film that documents the suppression of viable non-fossil fuel energy sources and provides a blueprint of how we can solve the environmental crisis. For more information, go to this website, www.seriousdisclosure.com. That's www.seriousdisclosure.com.